While we take a look at the development of feelings throughout history, it must have been the turn of the development of philosophical thought. However, before moving on to this, it will be necessary to touch on a point about the way the brain works. Homo sapiens, the most basic feature that distinguishes it from other living beings, the brain that can produce imagination, was constantly thinking. Why? Why? What does this mean? How can it be done? Questions, and the unknown. The ability to think abstractly, which is a privilege of man, was both his greatest helper and his greatest problem. Peace of mind is essential for psychological peace. However, the brain could only find peace as it found solutions and made decisions. The productive quality of a peaceful brain decreased, but psychological serenity increased. The brain wanted to make a decision and stop its activity on that subject. Or what is the same thing, the brain wanted to accept an event and be comfortable. With this attitude of the brain that pushes people, it was inevitable for the person who observes the nature he lives in to put the events he cannot solve, know or understand into a system with analogies and acceptances. And so it happened. Man created religion and clung to it. Now the spiritual world, which was the subject of religion, was being experienced parallel to the material world he lived in. Thus, events began to exist in both worlds at once. The deadlocks were eliminated. The spiritual world that man created with his own hands was answering the problems of the material world, and it was answering in harmony with nature. The religion of hunters and gatherers, Homo sapiens, is shamanism. In the Schwäbisch Alb region of Germany, animal depictions carved from mammoth ivory and tiny human figurines, including works dating back 32,000 years, were found. These figurines, including the first bird figurine depicting a wild duck in flight, are a wonder of art. These works show us how developed the imagination that we have been emphasizing from the beginning was in the first humans, while on the other hand, they reflect a tradition belonging to the first religion, namely shamanism. The head of the 2.5 centimeter tall human figurine is the head of a wild animal, most probably a wild leopard. This is a sign of shamanism. Later, when we consider nomadic society, we will talk about shamanism in detail. Shamanism, which will be explained later, has a well-developed structure and many details. It is inconceivable that even Homo erectus, who perceives its environment as it is, would not have noticed the superiority of some animals over Homo erectus. Most wild animals are stronger, faster, more agile, and more skillful than us. The senses of perception, sight, hearing, and smell are more developed than ours. For this reason, animals are admired and envied. But the desire to be like an animal emerged with Homo sapiens. In a situation where there is no imagination, there is no desire to resemble something. In the early days of Homo sapiens, the admiration felt for some animals, inherited from Homo ergaster, must have turned into a desire to resemble those animals. This desire turned some animals into idols. This idol animal is both feared and loved. Since then, there is both fear and love in every religion. Again, there are good animals, that is those who help humans, and bad animals, that is those who harm humans or can harm them. The concept of good and bad will also develop and exist as the main contradiction in every religion since that day. It was not possible for the envy felt for animals, the idolization of animals, to be perceived as a religion. People's desire to identify with animals was a step on the path to religion, but it was not enough. Let's take a look at how the spiritual world might have slowly come into being. Since the brain began to appear in living beings, dreams have also emerged. Today, although we know that dreams are an internal process of the brain, a process of placing and associating information, many people still look for other meanings in dreams. The majority of living beings and all mammals dream. Homo ergaster also dreamed. He may have been scared or happy with the dreams he saw. However, he could not distinguish between those dreams and the material world. We think he thought the dreams he saw were real, and he could not understand exactly what was happening. But when the imagination of Homo sapiens got involved, two worlds emerged. The first was the material world experienced during the day. The other was another world or another life that could be reached during sleep at night, and then no trace was left. Let's call this second one the spiritual world. But the dreams seen at night had a connection with what was experienced during the day. The material and spiritual worlds were intertwined. But many things seen in dreams were events that could not happen in the material world. At that time, the spiritual world was more comprehensive and stronger than the material world. Thus, it is clear that dreams seen during sleep at night deeply affected the first people. Documents obtained after the invention of writing document the connections people established between dreams and the outside world that we can perceive with our senses. The dream world is a door opening to the spiritual world with its possible future events, prophecies about life and death, actions that they cannot do in this world, and conversations that can be had with the dead or non-human beings. Thus, humans in the hunter society stage have come to the distinction between the material and spiritual worlds. As we mentioned before, the discovery of the spiritual world has greatly relieved people. It was now possible to find answers to unanswered questions that did not belong to this world. Unexplained events had a reason that did not belong to this world. The spiritual world provided peace and relaxed the brain. Homo sapiens saw their deceased relatives and loved ones in their dreams, which meant that they were alive. When they left this world, they did not leave the other world either. You always existed in the afterlife. You came from the afterlife, lived in this world for a short time, and returned to the afterlife. Since your existence continued, the respect and loyalty felt for you had a meaning. Homo sapiens began to bury their dead. They began to organize burial ceremonies. These ceremonies were the ceremonies that transferred the person from this world to the afterlife. They were held to facilitate the journey of the dead and to show that they were with them. The pain suffered was the pain of a temporary separation. There was essentially joy in the ceremonies. The joy felt for the sake of the dead was expressed. The dead person was going to where they should be, to reunite with their loved ones and family. How happy was the dead, the one who left this world? The first people observed that the body of the dead decayed immediately and disappeared over time. The most durable part of the human body, and the part that resisted death the most, was the bones. Thus, it was thought that the bone could form a bridge between this world and the afterlife. And as we will see later, the bone took on a special meaning. In this world we lived with our bodies. We were injured, sick, and in pain. Our bodies were the source of pain. When we died, the body decayed. The body remained in this world, it did not go to the other side. So what was it that went? The idea of the soul emerged. This concept solved the dilemma and the problems. The soul always existed, it never died, it always lived. A body without a soul was of no use. In order to live, the soul had to enter the body. At death, the soul left the body and went where it needed to go. When all this accumulation came together, religion could and did form. Fear and love, good and evil, the material world and the spiritual world, the body and the soul. When all these came together with the admiration felt for animals, the first religious motifs began to emerge. Every family had a protective animal. Clans chose animal totems for themselves. Worshipping animals began to take its place in human life as a first form of shamanism. As religion and religious ceremonies emerged, it was inevitable that someone would emerge to manage them. The first shamans began these first attempts at priesthood voluntarily. When shamans emerged, it became possible for religion to progress more rapidly and become more systematic. It was inevitable that people who devoted a large part of their time to religious affairs would produce more sacred concepts. Religion began to develop, and the priest or shaman began to specialize. However, it was necessary to contribute to the nourishment of the shaman. The family began to give gifts to the shaman. This point is one of the most important steps in human development. The shaman was nourished and even earned without working hard or spending much of his labor. Thus, the first core of class society was laid. The priest and the rest of the clan were separated from each other. This was also the emergence of the first foundations of exploitation. The priest began to be nourished by the clan. With the emergence of the shaman, a spiritual power began to take its place against material power. This point is one of the most important steps in human development. The shaman was fed and even earned without working or spending much of his labor. Thus, the first nucleus of class society was laid. The priest and the rest of the clan were separated from each other. This was also the emergence of the first foundations of exploitation. The priest began to be fed by the clan. With the emergence of the shaman, a spiritual power began to take its place against the material power. Who did the leadership belong to, the head of the family or the shaman? From here emerged the idea of the unification of material and spiritual authority. The contradiction was resolved when material and spiritual authority were gathered in one hand. Authority had changed form. Now physical power alone was not enough for authority. Authority itself became an institution, and from this, chiefs and later kings would emerge. Parallel to the emergence of religion and the animal gods taking their place in religion, but one step behind, the spiritualization of the sky and the sky gaining a spiritual value must have occurred. It is inevitable that the sun has deeply affected people from the very beginning. First of all, dawn, sunrise, means waking up from the world of dreams, returning to this world. The fears and mysteries of the night are dispersed by light. Light always comes from above, is light, warms us, shows us our surroundings. The fact that light guides us is a knowledge that has been known and ingrained in us since the most primitive living beings. The first action of the first living beings was to follow the light to find food. The soil that is stepped on, that is the world, is heavy due to gravity. When you slip, you fall from a tree, from a cliff. The world draws you in, and whoever enters it cannot get out later. The soil, the interior of the world, is dark. Light and darkness, above and below, guidance and disappearance, trust and fear, all these polarizations have been the founding principles of human thought. The night view of the moon and the sky, the stars and the Milky Way must have been a source of curiosity and deep influence from the very beginning. In them, there is a real and physical effect of the moon on the earth and its inhabitants, on the tides within us. This effect is first perceived subconsciously, that is, with the assimilated knowledge inherited from the first living being, and then consciously. The coincidence of the moon's cycle and women's menstruation is a situation that physically determines human life and is a curiously observed oddity. The concept of a relationship between the spiritual world and human life may have been based on the perception of the power of the moon's phases. The miracle of the moon disappearing and then resurrecting is also revealed by the howling of wolves, dogs, foxes, and jackals. In the darkness of the night, it finds its way among these misty, silvery, beautiful stars, passes through the clouds, and gives an imaginary image. We think that the moon has been more effective than the sun in determining the imaginary structure of man. When the sun rises, as the sun's light illuminates the surroundings, the stars, the sounds of the night, the erotic atmosphere of the night, and miraculous dreams all disappear. It is clear that gender and sexual behaviors played an important role in the establishment of the logical order of the first human. Birth occurs from the womb. It is normal for this to lead to the image of birth from the womb as the origin of the universe. The sexual intercourse that takes place before is important enough to be ritualized. Death, on the other hand, ends in the soil, in the world, in the darkness. But the womb is also dark. Coming from darkness and going to darkness gives the impression that there is an unknown power in the darkness. The idea of death and rebirth comes from here. The mother who gives birth and feeds is very important. In hunting, animal herds come out of the mother's womb and are sent to us to feed. For farmers, the seed grows in the soil, that is, inside the mother. Ploughing the fields and planting the seed is fatherhood, and the growth of the seed is birth. The view that perceives the world as a mother and burying as returning to the mother's womb must be very old. A born child is happy at the mother's breast. The relationship between a breastfeeding child and the mother is a symbiotic relationship. As we will see later, while the breast has a sexual connotation on the one hand, it has also become a symbol of fertility and reproduction due to its relationship with nutrition and birth. The sense of security of the baby at the mother's breast increases. This contributes to the development and sharing of trust within the family. In particular, the feeding of the babies by the family members who have milk, regardless of whether they give birth themselves, in other words, wet nursing, further increases this sense of security. It also raises family solidarity to the highest level. A woman reaches a special position in the family with her womb and breasts. She is integrated with spiritual feelings. She becomes a part of religion. We will touch on this subject again later. But even at this stage, no one should be surprised that the mother goddess of Anatolia is a woman with abundant breasts.